пусть по третьему.
Дальность 47.
По первому цель чужой цель зоне. Внимание, пусть по первому.
At 2:48 a.m., near the outskirts of Luhansk, a Russian S-300PMU-2 air defense complex powered up for a scheduled calibration cycle. The 64N6E2 Big Bird radar extended its mast, sweeping the sky in slow mechanical arcs. For 13 minutes each night, the system operated in a semi-maintenance mode, exposing components normally shielded behind armored housings. 13 minutes. That was the window Ukrainian reconnaissance teams had waited 5 days to exploit. The area was supposed to be secure. A perimeter of 2 Pantsir S-1 units guarded the complex, backed by a Tor M2 battery forming the inner ring. Electronic warfare crews operated a Krasuka 4 node positioned 800 meters south, saturating the air with broadband jamming. To Russian operators, it was an impenetrable fortress of radar, steel, and electrons. But Ukrainian intelligence had discovered something more important than a gap. A pattern, satellite sweeps, and SIGINT intercepts suggested that each night, for the brief calibration, the Big Bird radar operated at reduced power while its companion 96L6 acquisition radar rebooted. For those moments, the long-range eyes of the system blinked. At 2:51, 14 kilometers west of the complex, a concealed SSRU team initiated the attack. 4 decoy drones, cheap jet-powered Banshee derivatives stripped down to bare metal, ignited their engines and climbed into the night. Their task was simple: be loud, be obvious, and force the Krasuka to commit its main lobe. 90 seconds later, a second wave lifted. 6 FPV strike drones, each no larger than a man's forearm, carrying shaped charge micro-warheads designed to bore through radar housings and circuit enclosures. Their operators watched grainy silhouettes form on their screens as they dropped to treetop level. Fog rolled across the lowlands, nature's perfect jammer. The defenders did not know it yet, but the clock on their fortress had just started. At 2:53 a.m., the first decoys crossed into the engagement envelope. The Big Bird radar detected their exaggerated cross-sections instantly, painting them as medium-altitude intruders. Russian operators reacted with textbook procedure: elevate jamming power, tighten scan sectors, and cue the Pantsers to stand by. What they didn't see was the real threat. 6 FPVs slipping low along a drainage canal, flying beneath the radar's minimum depression angle. The Krasuka 4 surged to full output. A dense electromagnetic haze spread across the western quadrant, smothering everything from drone telemetry to civilian cell signals. But this was exactly what the Ukrainians wanted. The spike in jamming energy revealed the EW node's frequency sweep pattern, confirming it had locked onto the decoys and not the low cluster of FPVs crawling forward at 40 kilometers per hour. 2 seconds later, the first Pantsir fired. A 57E6 missile ripped into the sky, chasing the brightest of the decoys. Russian crews watched the blip vanish from their scopes and assumed the threat was neutralized. The second decoy suffered the same fate. 2 interceptors expended in under 10 seconds. The Ukrainians had paid $800 total to force Russia into burning nearly $200,000 of missiles. The third decoy played its part perfectly. It climbed hard, mimicking an attack run on the Big Bird radar. This triggered the Tor M2 battery, which launched a 9M338 missile. The intercept shredded the drone into metallic confetti, but the Tor's radar signature, its pulse repetition frequency, and beam geometry, was now fully recorded by Ukrainian electronic support elements. With all three air defense layers reacting upward, the 6 FPV drones entered the perimeter unchallenged. The operators pushed them down to 2 meters above the ground, flying between power pylons and dirt berms. Their thermal signatures were nearly invisible against the cold soil. Each pilot felt the same weight. 6 drones, 1 chance, and a complex worth hundreds of millions waiting ahead. They were now inside the fortress. The defenders still had no idea. At 2:56 a.m., the first FPV reached the inner berm. The operator, call sign Vector, tilted his camera up just enough to glimpse the silhouette of the 64 N6E2 radar mast rising above the fog. The dish rotated slowly, its metal frame groaning under the strain of calibration mode. Normally, the housing protecting its power distribution manifold remained sealed. Tonight, maintenance crews had left it half-latched. That was the opening. Vector eased the drone forward, weaving between cable trunks and generator crates. Ahead, a Russian sentry stood smoking behind a shelter wall, unaware that a 700-gram warhead was drifting 10 meters from his boots. The drone passed beneath him without a sound. Further south, FPV-2 and FPV-3 advanced in staggered formation. Their task: target the 96 L6 radar's coolant pumps. Without them, the radar would overheat and shut down in minutes. The operators watched the fog flicker as the radar's low-power mode swept across the compound. Even reduced, the search beams scattered their video feeds with static. At 2:57:10, the first defensive reaction finally occurred. A Pantsir's electro-optical system caught a faint heat wobble near the ground. FPV-4. The gunner hesitated. The signature was almost indistinguishable from a stray animal in the fog. That hesitation cost him. FPV-4 jerked left, accelerated to 90 kilometers per hour, and disappeared behind a fuel trailer. The gunner recentered his optic, confused. The Russians still believed the threat was above them. Meanwhile, FPV-5 and FPV-6 approached from the east, hugging the slope of a shallow ravine. Their operators used its natural curvature as a radar shadow. Any sensor mounted above 2 meters would miss them entirely. The Krasuka's main lobe remained fixed on the fleeing decoys still circling at altitude. No one was watching the ground. At 2:58 a.m., Vector's voice cut into the encrypted net. Visual on target housing. Maintenance door open, I repeat, open. 5 operators exhaled at once. The final phase was about to begin. The Russians had less than a minute to realize how deep the breach already was, and by the time they understood, the system would be beyond saving. At 3 hours, 12 minutes, the battlefield fell into a strange silence. The fog, now thick enough to mute even distant echoes, drifted through a compound that no longer functioned as a military node but as a burning wreckage field. Where radar dishes had traced the sky minutes earlier, only fractured silhouettes remained. Masts twisted, housings gutted, cables hanging like severed nerves. Russian crews emerged slowly from bunkers and shelters, disoriented. Some carried fire extinguishers, others rifles, none with a clear understanding of what had just unfolded. Their systems had not failed gradually. They had collapsed all at once, in a sequence too synchronized to be accidental. The Big Bird radar was offline. The 96 L6 was overheating beyond recovery. The generator farm burned with uncontrollable intensity, and both launcher vehicles lay inert, unable to receive or process firing data. They were blind, deaf, and alone. 10 kilometers west, the Ukrainian operators sat in absolute stillness, ears ringing from the intensity of the last minute one by one. Drone screens froze and faded as the final FPVs executed their terminal dives. For a moment, no one spoke. The team commander finally whispered the confirmation. Target node neutralized, full blackout achieved. No celebration followed. In operations like this, success was measured not in emotion, but in the quiet confirmation that every objective had been met with precision. They packed their gear, folded antennas, and prepared to relocate before Russian counter-battery fire began blindly probing the origin of the attack. At 3:04, surveillance drones orbiting high above relayed the final image. The entire S-300PMU-2 complex lay paralyzed. Its defensive umbrella collapsed into a dark crater of smoking ruins. Not a single radar sweep, not a single uplink attempt, not a single active launcher remained. Strategically, the impact was immediate. A 40-kilometer corridor in Russia's integrated air defense network had opened. And air corridor planners had been waiting weeks to exploit long-range Ukrainian assets could now maneuver with new freedom. And Russian logistics moving through the sector were suddenly exposed in ways they had not anticipated. By dawn, the fog still clung to the field. Fires smoldered softly inside gutted equipment. The operators were already miles away, their drones nothing more than scorched fragments scattered across a silent battlefield. The Russian crews, now running damage reports through dead systems, were forced to confront what had happened. A highly fortified, multi-layered air defense complex, designed to resist cruise missiles, aircraft, and electronic attack, had been dismantled in under 60 seconds by 6 drones no larger than a rifle case. There was no propaganda in that fact, no exaggeration, just a blunt, modern truth. In the new age of warfare, the cost of defense collapses under the weight of precision, timing, and a handful of operators willing to fly into the narrowest cracks of a fortress and split it open from the inside,